up, Kryptonians, and welcome to my Hall of Justice. My Hall of Justice is a little bit different from my Justice League that I put out at the end of every year. My Hall of Justice is basically my top 20 favorite comic book / superhero films of all time. After Infinity War came out, it took a few weeks, and I wanted to think about where my list now ranks and where to put each different film, and it took me a while to come up with this. But you know what? Before I talk about it, there's something that's missing from this video, something that I feel like could make it complete. Bam! Superman cape! That's right, this video just needs it. It just needs it. It needs the Superman cape. Oh my god, it's been so long since I've actually worn this thing. People, if you ever feel too weird for life, or you feel like you're a little bit crazy, or you're losing your mind or whatever, trust me, take it from a grown-ass man in a Superman cape. It could always get worse. This is part 1, which means I'm only going to be doing 20 through 11. I will have my top 10 probably later on next week. Before I get started, just a couple of more disclaimers. First of all, there are a lot of really great, awesome movies that I love that didn't make this list. Just to throw out a few honorable mentions off the top of my head, I mean, Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, Superman the movie, V for Vendetta, Captain America Civil War, Guardians of the Galaxy, first Hellboy movie, Blade 2, the 2 Kingsman movies, which surprisingly I didn't know are actually based off of comic books. Any or all of these movies could make the list, and I like or love a lot of those movies. But again, when you cut a list down to 20, you have to make some tough decisions. So people, keep in mind that just like almost everything with film, it is a subjective list. I'm not even necessarily saying that this movie is better made as a film than this movie, or vice versa. It's really just my way of saying, personally, this is how I rank them in terms of favorites, as far as how they struck a chord with me emotionally. If you have a problem with my 20 through 11 or with part 2 that comes out next week, that's awesome. You should get in the comment section and let me know how you feel. Without further ado, it's time to get this show started. Let's get into my top 20 favorite comic book / superhero films of all time, starting with number 20. My 20th favorite superhero film of all time is Blade. I am a huge Blade fan. Blade is one of my favorite Marvel characters ever conceived. But funny enough, my exposure to Blade wasn't through the comics at first. It was through this film that came out in 1998 that starred Wesley Snipes. This was one of the first genuine rated R superhero movies that didn't actually feel like a superhero movie. It felt like an action vampire movie. Normally you see comics influencing the movies instead of vice versa, but in this case, these movies were so well done and so awesome that it actually took some elements from the movies and it influenced some of the stories that Marvel told with Blade later. That, to me, friends, is impact, and that's why Blade, it just has to go on this list somewhere. And as it stands, it's number 20. At number 19, we have Dredd. That's right, Dredd, that came out in 2012. One of the greatest comic book films ever made, in my opinion. Funnily enough, I didn't even know that Dredd was a comic book character when I saw the 1995 Judge Dredd movie that starred Sylvester Stallone. I thought that movie was fine. It was whatever. It was But then years later, when I was like in middle school or something, one of my friends hated that movie and he started bitching to me about it, and he was like, oh my god, that is so not Dredd from the comics. I was like, Dredd from the comics? What are you talking about? I didn't know Dredd was a comic book character. He gave me a stack of Dredd comics that he had been reading. I fell in love with the character. Then I went back and watched the 95 film, and ooh, they fucked up. That's not Dredd from 2012. Dredd from 2012 is violent, it is dark, it is gritty, it is bloody. Everything that a Dredd movie needs to be. It is a sci-fi action thriller movie, very claustrophobic, takes place in one of the mega blocks. Karl Urban, if the movie had made more money, I think it could have been an iconic performance. It wasn't because the movie kind of bombed, but Karl Urban killed that shit, and I hope that we see him again as Dredd, number 19. Number 18, we have The Avengers. Keep in mind, The Avengers has not aged that well for me. It's not the same movie that it was when I first saw it all those years ago. It's not even my favorite film of Phase 1, but that does not mean that I do not remember where I was, what I was doing, who I was with when I first saw The Avengers for the first time. This is one of those films that stands as a great event, not just a good movie. It was the first time in blockbuster superhero filmmaking that we had ever seen all these different heroes converge on one screen and combine forces for the first time. He still has some pretty kick-ass action. It still has some great character dynamics. The movie may not be the crown jewel of the MCU like I once thought it was when it first came out in 2012, but that doesn't mean I can't still pop this movie in and have a good time. For the spectacle of the event that it was back in 2012, this movie has to go on the list somewhere. It just so happens it falls at number 18. Number 17, give me X-Men First Class. First Class was the first part of a new X-Men trilogy that, I'll be honest, I didn't know that I wanted. I was one of those people that was kind of bitching about it when it first came out. I was like, no, well, what about the old X-Men? I kind of wanted to deal with them first. We didn't get closure with them. Then all of a sudden the movie came out and I realized that I'm an idiot and I should be slapped for ever thinking that this movie doesn't belong with the other X-Men movies. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Professor Xavier and Magneto killed it. They absolutely crushed it. It's legitimately a debate now as to who had the better portrayals, the older guys who portrayed Magneto and Xavier or the newer guys from the new trilogy. This movie had some really fun action. It also has actual color and actual detail in the X-Men uniforms. I'm not going to apologize for it. That's something that I've bitched about X-Men movies for years, like literally years. X-Men First Class, one of my favorite X-Men movies of all time. Number 16, give me Iron Man. Earlier I said that the Avengers was actually not my favorite film of Phase 1. Well, that's because Iron Man is actually my favorite MCU film of Phase 1. I've already done a review for this movie and the Avengers on my channel. You guys can check that out if you want to, but I'll just suffice it to say that everything I said in that review applies here as well. Robert Downey Jr. instantly became one of the most recognizable and lovable heroes of our lifetime. It is a role that I don't think anybody else is going to slay quite the way he did. The movie's one of those perfect origin movies that captures everything that you need to know about Iron Man, and it has great humor, it has great dialogue, and it has great action. There's a reason why to this day Iron Man is looked back at as one of the more favorable entries of the MCU, and for me it's number 16 on my list. Alright, coming in at number 15, we have Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. I'm a huge Hellboy fan. I have read the comics of Hellboy since I was a kid, the Dark Horse comics for the uninitiated. Hellboy is one of those badass, awesome characters that I had always wanted to see portrayed on screen, and we finally got to see that with Hellboy and then Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. I actually love the first Hellboy movie, don't get me wrong, but Hellboy 2 did everything that I wanted Hellboy 1 to do, and it also did it a little bit better. It took everything I loved about the original and it expanded upon it. The action sequences are bigger in scope and scale, and they're more ambitious. They also flesh the characters out in deeper ways than they did in the original Hellboy movie. I mean, Hellboy in this movie is struggling with his relationship with humanity. He is struggling with bringing a child into that relationship with humanity and all the implications of it. Abe is, Abe is trying to get laid. Granted, it's not the most nuanced character motivation for Abe, but he's a fish. There's only so much you can do with a fish. My number 14 favorite superhero film of all time is X2, X-Men United, or X-Men 2, X-Men, whatever it is, X2. X-Men 2 is one of the greatest X-Men films ever made in my humble opinion. Like I said with Hellboy 2, it takes everything that I loved about the original X-Men and it goes even deeper and bigger and better in the sequel. It not only has one of my favorite one-on-one fights of all time between Lady Deathstrike and Wolverine, but it also carries over the themes and the important messages from the first movie and applies it to more of the characters. There's just a lot to chew on in this movie from a thematic standpoint, and there's also a lot to chew on from an action standpoint. There's no way that X2 was not going to make my list. #13, we have a superhero movie that was ahead of its time, and I, of course, am talking about Unbreakable. Unbreakable is unbreakable truly in the sense that it will forever be talked about, it will forever be mentioned when you think about a realistic portrayal of a superhero. This movie actually was an origin for a new superhero who didn't really understand or realize that he was a superhero. This has one of my favorite musical scores of any superhero movie ever done. Period. It is one of the best directed superhero films that I've ever seen. Grounded in realistic take on what would happen if a superhero or somebody with abilities popped up in our world today. What they would do, how they would go about trying to live their life or be a hero. And then years and years and years later, we got Split, and now we're getting Glass next year. Everything comes full circle, people. Number 12, we have one of the greatest origin films of all time. I, of course, am talking about Batman Begins. Begins revitalized the Batman character for a new generation because, let's be honest, we had all kind of grown tired of Batman's shtick at the end of the 90s. Batman and Robin almost single-handedly cratered the entire franchise, let's just be honest. Christopher Nolan took everything that we love about Batman and he grounded him and put him in a realistic world. This is a film that actually discovered the psychological underpinnings of not just Batman, but also Bruce Wayne as a character. From a score and directing and visual standpoint, this movie is eggs on a tit. It's just eggs on a tit all the way around. There's no way anybody could ever leave off Batman Begins. And if you do, well, much respect to you, but I'm not leaving it off of mine.
Unforgettable.
Finally, my 11th favorite comic book superhero film of all time is Watchmen. Watchmen is one of those timeless comic book classics. It was oh so close to making it to my top 10. But again, you know, top 20 decisions and all, right? Watchmen is so instantly iconic. It takes everything that you love about the graphic novel and it just brings all of that shit to life. There's a reason why a lot of people pass on a movie like this, because it's just too big. It's too ambitious a project for people to tackle. Zack Snyder just said, oh, really? Too ambitious? Watch me do me. And he brought the pages of that graphic novel to life. Everything about this movie screams comic book. The visuals still hold up today as some of the greatest that you've ever seen in a comic book movie. And again, the way it deconstructs the idea of superheroes and vigilantes and applies it to real world shit. Again, it was kind of ahead of its time. The movie came out in 2009, which is almost 10 years ago. So technically it's still in this time, but it just, you guys get what I'm saying. No matter how old I get, no matter how many movies I see, Watchmen will always have a special place in my heart. And for anybody who's a fan of the graphic novel, it's hard to imagine that it's not going to have a special place in your heart either. That is 20 through 11 of my top 20 favorite comic book / superhero films of all time. Let me know in the comment section what you thought about my 20 through 11. Let me know what your top 10 is if you have one. Stay tuned for part 2 where I will give you my top 10 favorite superhero films of all time. That'll be out sometime next week. Thank you guys for watching. Please hit that subscribe button if you like the video. And if you like what you see, tell me how you feel. And stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.